Hey there,
So Neal,
Philly.
what is happiness, brother?
Yeah, well, wow, have I got a bunch of stories. I'll tell you the number one source of happiness as far as I can see is giving to other people and being generous. So just this morning, um, I got a query from a friend of mine, a colleague at Meta, and he didn't have anything that he wanted for himself. He just really digs his brother-in-law. He has a lot of respect for him because the guy's awesome and he's a very giving person. And his brother-in-law, who loves baseball, is a magnificent coach for little league and kids baseball. And what makes him such a great coach is that he's so generous and sweet natured. And he doesn't teach just the art of baseball. And he doesn't teach just the art of winning. He teaches all the life lessons that come with baseball. And Michael, my friend, really wanted to celebrate this. He said, Neal, would you do me a favor? Would you just do me a kind of like a little video about it so that my brother-in-law will know that I respect him and I think that's great. And I thought, wow, will I? And I wound up doing a 2.5 minute video celebrating this guy's what I called the perfect game, which is ultimately when you are using baseball to help grow fine young people, that's a perfect game. And as it turns out, Michael wasn't expecting me to sort of go over deliver there, but I had to. I had to because because he was giving a gift to somebody else, and I can't underdo that, right? So who are the big winners in this? Michael wins because he's doing something nice for somebody else, and I win because I'm doing something nice for Michael. And this chain of feeling good, of doing nice things for other people. I mean, Phil, it made my day. It made my day. Do I get anything out of it? I'm not expecting anything out of it. I'm not expecting anything back. I just thought if somebody's willing to do something nice for somebody else, then I am for sure going to be part of that party. So I've got more stories, but I just love the how happiness is related to you making other people happy. That's the purest and best version of it.
Is brought to you by Podman. At Podman, we help podcast hosts manage, market, and grow their podcasts. For more info, go to trypodman.com.
Welcome. You're tuned into the Happy AF Show, your weekly ticket to a world brimming with joy, energy, and positive vibes. Are you ready to dive into stories that uplift, strategies that empower, and tips that can transform your day from blah to brilliant? Every week, we bring you the most heartwarming, inspiring tales from people just like you who turned their can'ts into cans and their dreams into plans. Whether you're commuting, working out, or just lounging at home, the Happy AF Show is your go-to source for all things happy. Together, we'll explore the corners of happiness, from the simple pleasures of everyday life to the grand gestures that make life worth living. So buckle up, dear listeners, as we embark on this joyous journey. Get ready to laugh, learn, and maybe even shed a tear or two of joy. This is the Happy AF Show, hosted by Phil Gerbyshak, ready to guide you through another incredible episode. Let's get happy AF now. Let the show begin.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Today we get to learn from the amazing storyteller that is Neal Foard. He's got a new program out called Story Fire, and we are excited that he's going to share some of that with us today. He led us off with some fire there, the magic of generosity, and of doing good and of feeling good and getting nothing in return. And I love that, Neal. So welcome back, man. It's great to see you.
Hey, Phil, it's nice to see you too. Thanks for having me on again. I love this theme, this program of yours. Man, people can't get enough of this stuff. They need this like sunshine.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so too. That's why I started it. I needed it. So I get to talk to folks like you. You give me sunshine, so I get to share it with the world. So thank you for being my sunshine, Neal. I appreciate you, man.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to me, man. So you did this nice thing, 2.5 minutes. And I say only, but I know you probably spent 3 hours on it.
Oh,
So
I spent
talk to
way more
me,
than that. Yeah,
right?
I spent
Yeah, a
way
lot of
more than
time.
that. Yeah,
A lot of
well,
time.
because if there's anything that I can appreciate, it's that when a family member does something nice for another family member, especially one by marriage, baby, you are part of the solution. And I know this guy, Michael Zelatel. He works at, as I say, at Meta, and I've known him for a while, and he is a gracious, ferociously smart, um, generous person who you know how you just want to help somebody?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
no, it's like you don't expect anything back. Although, as I was saying, I did get something back in the form of enjoying it. I enjoyed myself doing that. But here's what he's doing. He's reaching out to his brother-in-law, a relative by marriage, and he's saying, I think you're awesome. And if you've been on the receiving end of that in a family, wow, I don't think life gets much better than being reminded that you married well. Right? I'm not sure
Yeah.
you can make a smarter decision in life than who you decide to hitch your wagon to. And so, to whatever extent I can support that, I really want to participate in it. Anyway, but yeah, so part of another reason that I'm kind of happy and I'm so glad that you're having me on is that I just launched my storytelling course, my online storytelling course called Storyfire, which you can find at storyfire.net. And I'm quite proud of it. And part of the reason I'm proud of it is my message. My message is it's not just, people expect when they take a storytelling course that it's going to teach them how to tell stories, but it's more than that because it really is about, yeah, but what are you talking about? What stories do you choose to tell? Do you uplift? Do you encourage? Are you out there in the world spreading goodness? So much of what comes at us online is negative. Oh my Lord. Because rage sells. Rage triggers engagement. And this is, by the way, Phil, that's another reason why I'm just digging where you're headed, because you're the antidote, right? You are the
Trying to
antidote.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do the same thing. And let me tell you one of the things that I cite in the Storyfire course, which is I had this experience. And I think it's so instructive. I was in a waiting room, in a tire store. Okay. Now I was trying to decide whether I was in a good mood or a bad mood while I'm there. Let me explain the dichotomy. I had run over. You'd make a U-turn, and I flipped the curb and bashed down hand side. So 2
Oh,
flats.
no.
Okay. But that was the bad news. But the good news was I did it within 900 feet of a tire store. So I'm like,
Oh, yay.
yeah,
Hurrah.
okay. So yeah, I'm not happy about the fact that I was out 2 tires, but I thought, yeah, but this is a magnificent piece of luck. Could have been worse. Okay, so I'm in the waiting room. I'm in the waiting room of the tire store. When I'm there are 2 gals, almost exactly the same age. They look for all the world as though they might have been sisters. They're wearing the same clothes, roughly the same haircut, and one of them was on her phone, complaining loudly to a friend about the bad service that she'd gotten in a restaurant. And she was talking about how she had tried to have the server fired for being snippy, only to be shocked that the manager of the restaurant was not going to fire the woman, not going to fire the waiter. And the woman who had been, was so upset about this bad service, decided then she was going to make it her mission to have that restaurant closed. So she was doing bad Yelp review and she was going to put up signs on telephone poles, right? It was just all that. Okay. And she made special note in her story that she had a very expensive pair of glasses wrecked somehow in the kerfuffle around the bad service. Okay. She hangs up the phone. Not 30 seconds later, the other woman says to me, I was in a restaurant yesterday and I had the most marvelous thing happen. I was looking out the window and there was this young woman walking a very large dog. and she saw an elderly man in the crosswalk, and he was very reluctant to cross because it was a big boulevard, and he was kind of spooked that he wouldn't make it across in time, for the crosswalk sign. And this young woman went up to him, took him by the hand, and helped him across the street while the dog patrolled the crosswalk to make sure that no cars would enter. But this was the part that really got me. They got to the other side, and the two of them had this little conversation, and then they just walked on, still hand in hand. Isn't that wonderful? And I said quite loudly, yes, yes, it is. Now, why do I tell that story? Because let me ask you a serious question. Between those two people, who would you rather spend time with?
Well, definitely not the first one, right?
Right.
I'd want to spend time with the happy person.
Right. And she had very deliberately chosen to tell me that story, I believe, to inoculate me from the bile of the first woman. Now, this to me is a really clear example that it's not enough to tell a story well. You have to choose the story that you're going to tell so that it benefits all that hear it. Don't fart your grievances into the commons, right? Spread
I'm
some
quoting you
joy.
on that one. Don't fart your grievances into the comments. Spread some joy. I love that. So let's talk about picking stories, right? There's a couple things that have to go into picking a story. I mean, first of all, it's got to be a story. It can't just be a fact like, hey, I got a really good book today, and it is this book, right? It has to be a bit of a story. So how do we choose the right story, Neal?
Yeah, well, so first off, how did you discover that book? I'm sure there's a story behind that. It can be anything from like, I literally stumbled over it in the bookstore, or it can be a very good friend of mine who was going through a rough patch recommended this to me, and they say that the book helped them. Or it could be that I got this in the mail from my good friend Phil, and he just sent it to me, and it just made my day that he was thinking about me. And as it turns out, the book, blah, 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 there must be a backstory. They say one of the greatest things about a movie character or a character in any story is it feels like they came from somewhere. Like they're real enough to make you wonder what's their origin? Like, especially true of villains in movies. Like,
Yeah.
what is the backstory on Hannibal Lecter? How did he get to be what he is? Or you say, like, I don't know if you watched the latest season of Fargo, but I just absolutely loved that. There is a very interesting character in it called Ulla Munk, who, for all appearances, seems to have walked the earth 500 years ago. Okay. And you are just enchanted by what is this guy's tale, which they tell in the series. Again and again, what a great and compelling character has a lot to do with that they came from somewhere, like that they are real enough to have an origin story. And as in the case of the two women in the tire store, I really want to know where the second woman came from. How did she get this? Where did her positivity come from? Life can be awful, or it can be a real journey, a wonderful journey, depending entirely on how you see it. And Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which had very much to do with his experience in the death camps, Nazi death camps in World War II. He ultimately says you can take even an experience like that and turn it positive if you survive it. It can be looked at a certain way. And to me, the storytelling needs for your orientation to be, may I share this with you because I want to make your journey better.
Wow. So we have that. You talk about origin story, but you never found that origin story out. So do we fill in that gap? Is that part of great storytelling? Is we have to open that loop up and never tell the story? Or at some point, are you going to go back to that tire store and find her and shake her and say, tell me your story?
No, I will tell you that I did thank her very much outside. I thanked her for, I think I said something like, we're not friends, but I know we would be if
Aw.
if we'd known each other, earlier. You really improved my day. I'm quite grateful to you. Thank you. And I I feel like she must get that a lot because her acknowledgement of it was sort of that, like that person who'd scored a touchdown before, like they don't do an
She's
end
been
zone
there
dance
before.
where she's been there before, and she just gave me a very sweet smile and nod. She didn't say, "We're all in this together," but that's what her expression said.
Mm.
Um, it's a funny thing, about if you wanna tell stories and you're determined to do it, you know what starts to happen, Phil? You start to notice them more. You start to see every little exchange. Every meal in a restaurant is an opportunity to overhear someone or wonder to yourself, "I wonder what this server's tale is." Um, Gee, I wish I had my little dinosaur with me. Whenever I'm in a diner or a restaurant, I always leave something like this behind on the check, um, just to give a little extra thank you, and just to say, like, I'm trying to be not average. I want you to remember
Mhm.
me. And what I've found is that when you are out in the world looking actively for tales, your life gets better. Your life
Mm.
improves because you become an observer of human beings, and something that you will find is, yeah, you're gonna see D-bags, but most of the time, you're actually gonna see people being sweet to one another and being generous with one another. You just gotta look for it, and you're gonna find it. They say, like, if you're interested in buying a blue car, all of a sudden you look around and all you see are blue cars. Well, yeah, and that's how it is when you wanna tell stories better and you wanna the kind of stories that you wanna tell are about positive things that happen, you start to notice positive
Yeah.
things. I have this young couple. I just love these 2, Shane Shepherdson and his wife, Morgan, and they have this lovely little girl who's a gymnast. They are the sweetest parents. They're just he was in the service. He spent a long time in the Army. Sarge, I call him. Love this guy. And he and his wife are just shining lights of goodness. He was having a hard time at work, I guess, the other day, but he didn't say, "People are awful." He just said, you know how people are." And I knew exactly what he meant, because if you've spent any time serving in a restaurant or working as a bank teller or working at the DMV, you know exactly what he's talking about. But Shane didn't complain. He's just got such a upbeat attitude. They are the coolest couple, and they've got this wonderful little girl because they're so great.
Mm.
They're they're just reflecting vibes. Now, I'm so tickled to be connected to these 2 because every time I talk to them, my day gets better.
So as part of the storytelling way, Neil, to find the character and then give them a name, like you named him Sarge because of his military stuff. I mean, does that help us at all to frame that for other people, or is that for
You
you?
know, that's a great observation, Phil. I hadn't thought of it until you just mentioned it. He just to me, he is a sarge. He's how they say the Army backbone of the Army is the sergeants, it's the non-commissioned
Oh
officers.
yeah.
Well, that's very much him. He's this kind of like, "No, I don't have an Harvard MBA, but I could teach a Harvard MBA a few things." Because you go, "Yeah, right, you could."
Yeah.
Um, so let's go back to your point, which is you put a name on him, you put a nickname on him. That's a great observation that I hadn't thought of.
I mean, because
Um,
it just frames it for me, right? As you say that, now I see Sarge as opposed to he was in the military,
yeah,
which is like
yeah.
I was in the military, so I see him. Okay, so he's an average looking guy. Okay, but then you say Sarge, which to me says he's probably about 5'8", about 158 pounds. He's got a crew cut, probably pretty muscle bound, and has a big like big personality without really getting in your face.
He's everything except the height. He's taller than that,
Okay,
but otherwise, yeah, he's this. You know that there's corded steel under that jacket,
right,
and
that's right.
and um, and yet, despite his toughness, he's very gentle, and he's a man's man for sure. And his wife is just lovely. And the 2 of them they're Wyomingites, like from Wyoming, and they have a lot of the best qualities reflected from people from that state. They're strong and independent, and they're self-determining, and uh, I love the way they talk. They have this. I have to confess, my own father was from Casper, Wyoming, and
Oh,
so when I hear them speak, I kind of hear him a little bit. Like it would be very easy to picture them in the 1940s. Um, in some film noir, saying things like, "That ain't gonna shave any ice." You read me? Uh, yeah, wrap it up, soldier. You know, save it for the Nazis. Stop fighting against right.
so he's more Captain America than Steve Rogers. Is that what you're saying? Maybe a little more Bucky Brooks,
No, he's
Bucky Barnes. I mean, yeah. No.
he's got a little bit of, well, the two of them both are a little bit of like Tony Stark.
Mm.
But anyway, let's not dwell on the Shepherdsons, or they'll be embarrassed that I spent all this time talking about them.
Yeah, but let's embarrass your daughter instead. Let's talk about that work that you're doing with her on the course, because I think it's so interesting. We talked about this in the green room. Your daughter's a Z, and you're
she's in Gen Z, and I'm a boomer.
And you're a boomer. So combine the two, cross the streams. Let's talk about this.
Yeah. So the first thing is that my personal experience with Gen Z has always been fantastic. In the times that I've interacted with my daughter's friends, I always walked away incredibly impressed. These are very savvy kids. They're very media savvy. They're very well informed. They're highly distrustful of media. I worry that what's getting reflected out in the world, all this negativity and bile and conflict and so forth, that they're selling us the rage machine. I worry that that's influencing them. They don't soak it up at all. They have a waterproof coating, and they are more skeptical of it than I am. And I've been around. So yeah, my daughter, I asked her to quit her job and come work with me full time to try to get this story fire thing going. That's a risk. That's a risk because she's making money. But I just was very impressed that Gen Z, because of their savvy with tech, she would know things I didn't know about social media. She would be able to activate us on platforms that I was ignorant of. She would know what the cadence of releases were. And Dad, I think you need to fix this on the course, and so forth. I have not been disappointed that she has all of those qualities. But there's something that disappoints me very much when I hear people complain about Gen Z, especially people in my own age cohort. They think of them as entitled or lazy, and it's like, I don't see it. I don't see that. I don't entitled. What are you talking about? Maybe they've had bad experiences, okay, that are legit, but my experience is when you put a boomer or an Gen X, you get the best of both worlds. You get somebody who's got enough mileage on them to know the big sweep of things and what's a flash in the pan and what you really need to be, not waste time on. You need to a boomer or Gen X, when they're generous in spirit, what they'll understand is that the world that Gen Z is experiencing is not the same world we grew up in. So you can't judge them by your standards. You can't really judge them at all because you haven't lived through what they're living through. And then the same is true for Gen Z, who says, okay, boomer. It's like, well, you would be doing exactly what I'm doing if you had lived what I lived. People don't change. There is a magnificent thing that I've seen in offices where you'll find like a Gen Xer mentoring a Gen Z, and then they are very dangerous because they're going to learn from each other. And when you get all that savvy and all that talent and all that energy and their hands flying across the keys as they use, Adobe Premiere or Final Cut, like, have you noticed, Phil, how practically everybody in Gen Z knows how to edit?
Every one of them. Every one of them.
Right.
Knows how to edit or Photoshop things.
Right.
And there's air quotes around that because they're not using Photoshop, and they're probably not using even Final Cut. They probably found some free app somewhere that they hacked together to create something amazing. It's incredible. They're super resourceful.
Yeah. But I'm still, I don't know if my daughter would be thrilled to hear me say this, but there still is an appreciation for the past great achievements in cinema that my daughter and I tried desperately to have her watch the great films. Like, sweetie, let's sit down and watch Godfather Part 2 together. too long. Oh, heart to hear you say that, you know. But anyway, to get back to the idea of if if you are in business and you have Gen Z in your office, you really need to establish a relationship with these people if you're an older generation person to mentor and then also be their protege on that to capitalize on their savvy of things like social media and so forth. Because I came from the world of advertising, and advertising in the short span of 15 years does not resemble what it used to be at all. It's not the same game at all. And it's my heart breaks for people that are in advertising that didn't get to experience it like in the early 90s or the 80s when it was on. I mean, it was a fabulously sexy enterprise, and it was filled with smart, creative people. And there are still and always will be smart, creative people, but they just can't make a fortune in advertising anymore unless they are part of the automation.
Yeah. Yeah. AI has changed a bit of that. Nonetheless, being able to pick a story, though, is still super valuable.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's a lot of what your course has got here, right? I mean, it's not just telling a story. To your point, it's choosing the story.
Yeah. It's everything.
giving that story. Yeah. So tell us more, Neal. Like, what
Yeah.
else is it?
Okay. Well, I'll give you a really, really good example of what I go into in the course, and that is that your number one obligation is not to be slick. Your number one obligation in both telling a story and picking one and so forth is to be human. Because what people need to know above all other messages is that they are not alone. There is so much loneliness out there, and people feel isolated, and people feel they feel frightened that any day now they're going to get laid off by somebody who doesn't give a shit about them. When you are out there in the world and you are deciding to tell a story, yeah, you need to broadcast quickly that you are a human being. Now, let me give you an example of it doesn't have to be slick to be incredibly powerful. I watched a group of 12 incredibly successful businesswomen hear a sales pitch from a man, and they happened to be gathered together for a conference. And that was how that he had the opportunity to pitch them on this product because they were all together. These are smart, savvy, impatient, accomplished women. And that comes with all the baggage of having to live what they lived through, all the strain of like, they've got to walk that tightrope, Phil, between in command, but not bitchy, like they're always being judged by a different standard about, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
So these gals are super savvy. Okay, here's what, I'm going to describe to you the salesman's pitch, and then I want you to tell me what you think the results, how well he did sales wise. Okay. So he pulls a speech from his pocket. He gets introduced. He pulls a speech from his pocket. He reads it word for word, looking up only once, and then back to the speech, finishes, folds it up, puts it back in his pocket, and without saying thank you or anything, just sits back down. Okay. Now, from that description, what do you
0
think?
for 12. 0 for 12.
You'd think, but the actual results were not only did he sell out his inventory, but two of the women made a special point of telling him how well he'd done because he was 7 years old and he was selling cookies that he and his sister had
you
made.
cheater.
So, right. But here's the point I'm going to make. If he'd been too slick, that would have been a little creepy. And remember always, he's not really selling cookies. What he's really doing is providing something that the women are only too happy to buy, which is if you are a businesswoman and you are having to face this tightrope I was talking about before, it gives you very few opportunities during the day to express your maternal instinct, to enjoy children, to be a human being for just a few minutes. That's what he really gave them. And they were only too happy to buy and support his effort because for 5 or 6 minutes, they got to be themselves. And now, if people often will have stage fright in front of a room for very good reason, which is there has never been a time in nature in our long human history where standing alone without a weapon, surrounded by eyeballs looking at you, there was never a time when that was a good thing, right? Your body is trying to save you. Your stage fright is a natural phenomenon brought on by a healthy parade of ancestors who got you here by being scared of stuff like that. Okay, so your stage fright is completely natural. Don't be mad at yourself for feeling stage fright. Don't feel like you are somehow flawed. You're not flawed. You're normal. Okay, so don't accept any responsibility. Just know that this happens. But I've got a way to help you get over yourself. You ready?
Ooh, yeah.
Everything what you're there to do is not to be slick. It's not to be impressive. You're there to help those people. The reason you're standing up is you've got something valuable to give them. So don't worry. As long as you give the value that you're there for, they don't care whether you pitted out your shirt or whether you are visibly shaking. They don't care. They don't care. If you give them value, they're going to walk out of that meeting or that occasion and they're going to feel good. Like, wow, that was pretty good. That poor gal, boy, she was nervous, but that's good stuff. Okay. Just remember, everybody's favorite subject is themselves. You deliver value. You have nothing to apologize for. And my guess is that even if you're shaking, and to go back to Viktor Frankl, who used to, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl used to say, you just have to embrace your nervousness. You just have to laugh about it. And that he said that he was quite nervous in front of an audience and he was visibly sweating profusely. And that what he said was, I think I might be sweating more than anybody who has ever been in this room. Let's go for the record. Okay. And all of a sudden, nobody cares about the sweating anymore. You owned it. You were not frightened by it. You embraced it. And by doing so, perversely, you showed courage. There was a perverse display of self-possession. So focus on the value you're delivering. Write down ahead, before you go up, write down, this is the value I'm providing these people. This is what I'm giving them. This is the gift I'm giving them today. As long as you stay focused on giving that gift, you're probably actually going to feel less nervous as long as you stay focused on the gift. But I don't care if you're nervous. It doesn't detract. It doesn't detract from you as a human being. You are a normal human. It's not your fault. Accept no blame for it. Okay? You're not a bad person and you're not a deficient person. You are a normal person who is getting up to try to give value. You're that little boy giving them cookies. You know what? They actually want that. They praised him afterwards. Ricky, you did such a good job. And you know what? They mean it. So that's
context matters, though. Context matters. I mean, if that had been me up there reading a paper, see, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking some 45, 50-year-old schmuck like me that's reading, okay, Neal, and today we are here to, and that's where context matters, which is where the story.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, I'm sorry for interrupting because, yeah, you were right on the cusp of a great observation.
No, I was going to say, right, but the story comes from adding that context in.
Yes.
Backing that up, right? So that's where
right on.
That's where we're going there.
Yeah, you can. Let's go back to your description of a sort of middle-aged guy reading from a paper. You can actually have a laugh riot with something like that. You can lean into that, and like add things that are on the paper. Oh my God, I can't believe I just read that out loud. That was a note. So sorry. Or there was a stand-up comedian who was a kind of middle producer. That is, he was a journeyman. He'd never broken through. His act was okay. He was hired to do, this would have been in the late 80s. He was hired to do a real estate convention. And he was nervous that his material was not going to be very well accepted. And he suddenly had the brainstorm that he wasn't going to get up as a stand-up comedian. He was going to get up as the worst real estate agent in the history of real estate agents. And he was going to talk about all the things that he does to try to make himself worse. And so what he was able to do was have fun with the mistakes that bad real estate agents make, embrace them, claim them for his own. And it was this incredibly instructive way of imparting the information with look at the two ways he could have done that. I can get up and I can tell you a few jokes. Your ass is going to forget me the minute it walks through the threshold of the door. Or I could get up there and I can be an expert in mistakes that you should not make as a real estate agent. Or, and this was the genius, I'm going to get up and as the worst real estate agent of all time, I'm going to explain my method. Fabulous. Fabulous. That's the context you're talking about. It was a way of worst things you can do as a real estate agent. Hey, this is the stuff that's kind of made me famous. And so everybody, and you know what happened to him? Instead of being a sort of middle of the road stand-up comedian, he made millions in real estate agent conventions. He became the keynote speaker, and his act was, they ate it up because it was both funny and informative, and it got better and better and better. He made vast sums of money of all things, delivering that kind of crazy value he stumbled upon it. He stumbled over it and then went, whoa, that went over. Wow. And the organizer went, John, that was fantastic. We're going to do another one in Memphis. Can you come up and do it there? Oh, I'll take the check.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Staying focused on that gift, though,
right,
probably helped him get there, right? You mentioned staying focused on the gift that we're giving makes you less nervous to maybe go out on a limb and try something new.
I'll give you a good example.
That maybe, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I keep doing that. I'm so sorry, Phil.
No, go.
Okay. I want you to imagine how much fun it would be. You've got a retired couple who's barely able to make ends meet. The Social Security is, it ain't like it used to be, and they're really having to trim corners. And then you find out that they have just won $3 million in some contest they don't even remember entering, and it's your job to go tell them. All right. Are you nervous?
Hell yeah. Nervous as hell. Yeah, for sure.
All right. But are you going to enjoy telling them?
Every second of it. Absolutely.
Right? You are so convinced that they're going to want to hear this that you can't wait. And the time you spend preparing is all about like, how much fun could I have telling them this news? As long as you know that what you're doing is valuable, is of value to them. It doesn't have to be cold fusion. It doesn't have to be, growing food from sand. But if it's valuable at all, just deliver that with the happiness of knowing this is useful to people. There's nothing quite like being happy to deliver news to somebody. And
absolutely.
I had this acquaintance that, I had done business with him for years. He had this company that provided this software that wound up, what it did was it took video and you could split screens so that lots of people could be on the same call. And he didn't invent that. What he did was he had a version of it that drastically reduced the amount of data that needed to be transmitted in order to make it work. And it's like, okay, great. And then COVID came along. And after 10 years of barely keeping the lights on, I don't know whether it was Zoom and Teams, but they got into a bidding war to grab his tech. And he wound up getting a chunk of money, like so much money that he was free for the rest of his life. And what did he do with it? There was this little cafe that he used to go to all during his lean years. and this couple would feed him basically for free. Like he would order a muffin and then they would bring him a full breakfast, and go, "Oh, got the order wrong." And they had done that for years. He went in, he asked me if I would help him move on a Saturday. I'm like, "Sure. Yeah." Now, I don't know any of this. So I dressed, in my refrigerator moving clothes, and we're in his old Honda, and we roll up to this cafe. He says, "Do me a favor, let me do the ordering." Okay. So he says to this gal, this older gal, "What can we get for less than $5?" And she looks us over and says, "Is you boys working today?" And he goes, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, let me see what I can do." She comes out with 2 plates of eggs and bacon and toast and 2 full cups of coffee and a to-go bag with 2 muffins in it. And this guy looks at her and goes, "Oh, that's a lot. I don't think we can cover that." And she goes, I kid you not. The quote was, she says, "Well, when you make it someday, you can pay me back." That was the way she put it. We go out. Before we leave, he drops a manila envelope on the table, about that thick. He had opened a trust, and in his name, and then in the paperwork, he'd signed it over to them. All they had to do was fill out the paperwork, and he gave them a little ATM card that had a bunch of money in it. But I mean, he gave them a couple of $1,000,000 just to repay her and him for having done that. Okay, so we go out to the Honda, and I had the gift of getting to watch that gal open that envelope and start to read. And I ultimately said to the guy afterwards, I go, "Why did you want me to dress for moving?" And he said, "You don't think that's moving?"
That's awesome. Neal, you got so many more stories, dude. I love that. And you teach us how to tell them. So talk about moving. You want to move people.
Yeah.
Friends, I encourage you to go to storyfire.net to check out Neal's storytelling course. If you don't know Neal Foard, holy crap, you need to. He's got 1,000,000 stories and 1,000,000 ways to help you tell yours. Pick your right story. And if you're getting nervous when you're telling those stories, remember what Neal said. Stay focused on the gift that you're giving the audience and get over your stage fright. So Neal, as always,
Wow.
it's a joy, my brother. Thank you.
You are a good marketer, Phil. I appreciate the plug.